And with that, I'm going to turn it over to tonight's moderator. Megha, over to you.
Thanks so much, Shafreen. Hi, everybody. Hi, Katie. I'm so happy you're here. I think the way we're going to do this, Chun, is you will get us started with a reading, and then we'll dive into conversation. And as Shafreen said, everybody watching, feel free to think about questions that come up for you and put them in the Q&A. I will be keeping an eye on the Q&A. But yes, I'm so happy you are all here to celebrate this brilliant novel by an absolutely extraordinary writer. Chun, would you like to introduce the book and get us started?
Of course. Thank you so much, Megha, for doing this with me. And thank you, Jeffrey, for hosting this event. I'd like to maybe first say a few things about the book, then I'll read a short excerpt. So this is a historical novel about the 19th century Chinese immigrants in the American West. And the plot centers around a girl looking for her father in California. If I summarize the book in one sentence, I would say it's about 4 Chinese immigrants seeking for family belonging and fulfillment in a land that doesn't welcome them. So there are 4 interlocked main characters. There's the little girl, Sixiang, who's sold to a human trafficker after famine hits her village in southern China. Her mother and grandmother sell her in the hope that she will escape starvation and also somehow find her father, Guifeng, who has left for California as a contract laborer to build a transcontinental railroad 10 years earlier, and somehow cut off contact with the family. And then there's another character, Fei Yan, who's from the same village and who escapes abusive marriage and come to California in the hope to start her life anew, but finds herself trapped in a brothel. And she's also she's also a childhood sweetheart of Guifeng. And then there's a 4th character who's Dao Shi, who's born to a family of 5 generations of Taoist priests, but he sort of renounces his family profession when he comes to California as a prospector. But when he is building the railroad, he sort of finds his calling again. So the novel is told in the alternating perspectives from these 4 characters. I'm going to read an excerpt from Guifeng, the father's figure's perspective, about his early days building the railroad. This is also when the title phrase "straw dogs" first appears in the novel. So this is the date. The date of this episode is 1865. Their current job was to hew out a ledge for a roadbed along the cliff of Cape Horn, which dropped 1,200 feet into a torrent of water below. With a rope tied around his waist, Guifeng was lowered over the cliff edge down a slope that was almost vertical. He tried to focus his eyes on the rock face in front of him, its creases and veins magnifying as his hands and feet groped for a firmer hold. He imagined himself as a small tree taking root in a rock, but was certain a breeze could blow him away should a rope break for one reason or another. Dao Shi was lowered beside him. Together, they were to drill holes into the rock face, insert black powder into the holes, and light the fuse before being hauled back up. Huifeng volunteered to do the hammering first to take his bind off the hide, but his first strikes were soft and crooked. Dao Shi, however, didn't comment. He said something else instead, a quote from Lao Tzu, 天地不仁，以万物为刍狗. Huifeng asked him what it meant. It means heaven and earth do not pick and choose. They see everything as straw dogs. Straw dogs? They're dogs made of straw our ancients used for sacrifices. Real dogs were too expensive, so they made straw ones to serve the purpose. A straw dog was prized as a sacrifice and then burned or tossed away afterward. Prime or decline, heaven and earth do not favor or disfavor. In their eyes, all are the same. We're all straw dogs, which makes me wonder what heaven and earth think of us now. Is what we're doing to the mountain no different from flickering off specks of dust? Do they neither approve nor disapprove? Huifeng laid down another strike, steadier now, but the spike went in less than an inch. This doesn't feel like dust to me, he said. And our bodies that don't feel like straw, Dao Shi said. When they changed position, Huifeng's legs shook again, separated from the void by only a jutting sheet of rock. Soon, he also became aware of a pain in his hands, clutching the spike, which were cracking under the force of Dao Shi's hammer strikes. You need gloves, Dao Shi said. It would be nice if our bodies did not feel pain like straw. By the time they were hauled up, Huifeng's palms were bleeding. A hawk soared past him, heedless of gravity, up and up into the sunlit blue that was cold and brilliant, welcoming nothing and everything. Huifeng threw himself on the ground the moment he reached it, as explosions boomed below him, shaking his body as if it were hollow as straw. Let's stop here.
That was beautiful, Chun. Thank you. It's such a treat to hear you read. I mean, I am, as you know, a huge fan of your work, and your prose is just marvelous. Maybe we can get started by talking about how this book started for you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So several years ago, I co-taught interdisciplinary course with a history professor at the school I'm teaching, Providence College. It was on East and West encounters, and one of the units were about early Asian American immigrant experience, the kind of systemic pressures they were facing. And I was struck by how much I had not known about this history. It seems very important things to know, but I felt like I've lived here for 20 years. Somehow, some of the basic historical facts just is something I wasn't aware of. So after I finished the previous book, I started to do more research just to learn about this history more in depth. And the best way for me to learn about something is to write about it. And then there's also this personal connection. I have family member, my father's great-grandfather, so my great-great-grandfather, who actually came here to build the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1860s. He stayed for about 20 years and then went back to China. So there's that kind of family personal connection. I feel that this early immigrants, my precursors, I came here 150 years later. So I wanted to, to find out, to learn how their experience were similar or dissimilar to my own. It seems like a lot of things have changed since then, but there's certain things still remain the same, such as the ambivalence of belonging. Then during the pandemic, of course, some of the differences also seem to have collapsed. we saw the past echo back in the present in quite literal terms. So I wrote a lot of much of the book during the pandemic years. So much of my own emotional experience was written into the novel.
That makes so much sense because you were talking about co-teaching this class and learning a lot about the systems and social structures. But in addition to that, part of what is so powerful in this book is that we are so vividly and fully in the interior lives of these characters. I'm so curious about how you wrote your way into these characters.
Mm-hmm. First of all, lots of research. I felt like first of all, I need to learn about their experience, and I read everything I could get hold of. Not just the basic facts, but also details about their lives. I had to learn about the Chinatown, women and children in Chinatown, the missionary rescue, the railroad workers' experience, the woodcutters' experience. I did some field research. I went to Xinhui, which is where my ancestor and all the characters come from. And then I also took, I went to San Francisco, Chinatown. I took the train across the Sierra Mountain. I did even before I started writing the book, I felt like I wanted to have two main characters, one who's a railroad worker, because of this family connection, and also because lots of Chinese, that's one of the few professions, Chinese laborers were able to have back then. And I thought there should be a female character who's trapped in this sex trade, because the few Chinese women who ended up in California oftentimes were forced into prostitution. I didn't quite know what their dynamic would be like. So when I started writing, this Sixiang character sort of comes into being. She's a 10-year-old and being sold to this very alien, taken away from her home, completely alone in this alien landscape. I think it's perhaps my daughter was 10 at that time. I was terrified to imagine what would happen to a little child put in this kind of situation. But at the same time, I also felt compelled to imagine that, because that did happen to many children. And with this character emerging, the narrative of the child looking for the father sort of surfaced. And then after that, as I was writing about the father's railroad days, Dao Shi character sort of emerged, because I felt like there needed to be spiritual presence in the book.
Can you talk a little about that? I was very curious about your writing of spirituality in this book and its place in this very harrowing, very clear-eyed story.
Yeah, I guess spirituality is an integral part of a community. It's it's something that connects people and helps them transcend mere survival. And in this community, Taoism is their religious practice or spiritual practice. And the Dao Shi character was a sort of an on and off Taoist priest. He provides, rituals, especially death rituals, healing rituals for the community. But at the same time, he also grapples with some fundamental questions. He wonders about Tao, like what is Tao in this world? How to live according to Tao in a world that is perilous, that is hostile. How to act appropriately or optimally. So he wonders about that verse from Lao Tzu, which is the foundational text of Taoism. The straw dog quotes I read in the excerpt. So he in that quote, he wonders if heaven and earth see everything, everyone as straw dogs. They do not favor or display favor. They do not pick or choose. Does that mean they're just neutral? Or does that even also can that also mean that they're indifferent? That the universe is indifferent to human suffering. There's no supreme power that weighs in on human affairs. So he puddles over it, and after he quotes that verse, and after Guifeng hears it, Guifeng also puzzles over it, especially when he finds himself in difficult situations, when he finds his life brittle. So straw dogs become a kind of motif to sustain the spiritual tension of the book.
Yeah. And so you were writing this over the pandemic years, and you were writing about very difficult material. So this is kind of more about you, the author, than about the text necessarily. But I'm so curious to learn a bit about your thinking around hope and resilience. And whether your thinking on that changed over the course of the book.
Yeah, it's also, I think hope is very essential, for maybe both myself, especially as a parent, so it's almost impossible not to lose hope. You cannot lose hope. You are not permitted to lose hope. And in the story, I think it's essential, especially for the Sixiang character. She is this little girl being taken away, and so alone. Hope is something that keeps her going. Her hope is very single-minded. She hopes to find her father, bring him home, to bring him back to China and reunite the family. So this is like her religion in some way. This is her faith, because nothing else is going on for her, right? It's something that sustains her. But then she has to grow up. She grows up and learns that it's not what you hopes for doesn't often get fulfilled. So she learns about disappointment, but then she also learns that one cannot just give up hope. You modify your hope. You sort of hope for something that's more tenable, right? So I think that's something I'm playing with. Not necessarily the object of hope, but the hope itself, the idea of hope itself.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You write the child character so well, and I think for all the writers in the room, could you offer some insight into your process of writing a child? I think that is so hard to do.
I maybe because I have a child, as 2010. Yeah, so as I'm writing this child who grows up, my daughter is also growing up. Maybe that's it. A lot of my writing is my early stage of writing is this free writing. I don't really I really just try to focus on a character or moment and just write down everything that comes to mind. Then later I will edit, I will trim, I will sharpen. But a lot of the writing has to do with intuition. Just trust your intuition and not question yourself too much, not doubt yourself too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of the book, part of the book is, of course, very much about your writerly intuitions, but then there's also another part which I think takes a lot of project management. Can you talk about managing the different perspectives and timelines? What was your process for doing that? Because that seems like a huge undertaking.
Yeah. I didn't know how to structure this novel, but when I was rereading some books, or reading and rereading some books by Toni Morrison, and when I read A Mercy, I sort of thought, oh, Mercy is also a historical novel, told with this kind of interlocking, alternating perspectives, involving multiple characters. So I thought that's a good kind of structure. That can be a good structure for my own novel. So once I figure out it will be this alternating perspective, it become easier. And then, yeah, it did involve some mapping, making charts, writing down timelines, color-coded kind of timelines. But the beginning stage, I was really just doing lots of free writing. That took about several months. Then once I had an idea of how the characters are related, how they're interrelated, then I started doing this very conscious mapping. You really just sometimes you have to remember, like, when are they born? Like those milestones, how old they are now, right, at this point. So yeah, there's that kind of bookkeeping.
Yeah, yeah. And this is so before this book, you wrote a collection of short stories, and which also brilliant, called How, for anyone in the Zoom room who is curious. What was different in writing the novel, or like what are your thoughts on the two different forms? Which calls to you in what way? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I have to say, currently, I think I'm more attracted to the novel form, mostly because of this world building. It just allows. I like the obsession, the kind of extended time spending. It's like immersion. Like you feel you can be immersed in this world, and just in this. It's like a safe space. It's like a kind of retreat. You're living this parallel life almost. But it's not like avoidance from life. It feels like writing a novel seems to add depth to your life. You know what I mean? And with short stories, of course, it also involves world building, but it's because of the time you spend with each story. It's more in and out in comparison to writing a novel, right? With a novel, you're going to stay in that world for probably a few years, right? But with the story, oftentimes, especially my short stories, I imagine a character in a particular situation, and then once it's done, we sort of both move on. But with the novel just requires consistent attention and chronic obsession, which I enjoy.
Yeah, I love thinking about it as like a long-term obsession. I think that I see themes emerging in your work that I might say are your obsessions, but I think your answer is more interesting. Do you see thematic obsessions emerging that you think you will carry forward into your next few books?
Yeah. I actually just recently realized that I was asked a question, similar question. I was thinking, yes, in my all my fictional work, it's a constant thematic concern seems to be about how the societal forces act upon individuals and how the individuals react or respond in return. My novel in Chinese is about two sisters' experience during the early years of Chinese economic reforms. Then how it's about Chinese women in China and in America, confronted with racism and sexism. In this book, again, is about how the characters are shaped by societal pressures. So I do see myself interested in this tension between the personal and the societal.
That's fascinating. I'm going to remind everybody watching that we would love your questions. Please put them in the Q&A box. So you are also a poet, and I'm very curious about the connections between your poet self and your novelist self or your fiction writer self.
Okay. I still write poems from time to time, but I feel like I'm mostly a fiction writer now because just I've been mostly writing fiction. I because I like storytelling and I don't write narrative poems. I mostly for poetry I just write personal musing. So I reserve narratives to fiction, but I think I incorporate lyricism in fiction. I try to write good sentences.
I mean, you are so modest, Chun. I feel like your sentences are they're gorgeous and beautiful, yes, but there's also, I feel like, a way in which the seriousness of your fiction is kind of inextricably bound with the seriousness of your sentences. And I'm not sure I can fully articulate it, but like the beauty of your prose is essential to, I think, the project of your fiction. And I would just encourage everybody who's watching this who is not familiar with your work to dip in and see what I mean. How was all about language in such meaningful ways, and I think that carries over here too. We have a couple questions. One is from Susan, who says, "How do you choose the characters' names?"
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I choose the characters' names. So for Sixiang, for the little girl, her name Sixiang actually means remembering hometown. So in Chinese, so really it's very symbolic name. She is the one whose main goal is to go back to her hometown and go back to her village. And the father's name Guifeng is named after the mountain in Xinhui where he's from. He comments on that too in the novel. Then Fei Yan is the name for Fei Yan means flying swallow. Is that the kind of bird? Swallow. Yeah. So because she likes to run, so like in Chinese when people describe fast runners, they will say Fei Yan. So yeah, and Dao Shi is really just means Dao is priest. Yeah. So there's some meaning behind the names.
Cool. We have another question from an anonymous attendee who says, what is it like writing in both Chinese and English? Do you think Straw Dogs would have been different if written in Chinese?
I was actually just thinking about that. Yeah, if yeah, I'm pretty sure it will be different. And as to how, I don't really know. Of a friend of mine who's an editor and working in Chinese press asked me to translate it into Chinese, and so I'm wondering what that would be like.
Are you doing it?
I don't know, maybe, but I wonder if I can just keep it exactly the same in the Chinese version, or things need to be changed. I'll have to find out when I'm doing it. But I think it's inevitable to be different when you write in a different language for a different audience, because even just subconsciously you're going to pick and choose certain informations. Sometimes you don't have to translate. I think there are certain cultural translation that's inevitably there.
Yeah. I saw Jhumpa Lahiri a couple months ago, and she was talking about translating her own work from Italian into English.
Mm-hmm.
And she was talking about how it was almost another really thorough editing session. Because she caught all the instances of words which made her unhappy, or, rhythms that she didn't like and things like that. And it was really like rewriting all of these stories once again, which I thought was so fascinating and not at all, a very simple process of transference.
Yeah, I just read her Whereabouts. I love that book, and then that's translated from Italian, right? So
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I totally get that. When I did self-translation with my poems, oftentimes I would leave the versions different, because what works in English just doesn't work in Chinese. Oftentimes because of the sound. What sounds good, in English doesn't sound, the equivalent of that word doesn't sound right in Chinese. So I would leave the versions different. With novel, it takes so much time, so I don't even know if I have the energy to do that. Even if I have the interest to do that, I'd rather just start something new.
Yeah. There's a question from Cherry C who says, was there an alternate ending you were considering?
Alternate ending. Actually, this ending is something I wrote before I finished the book. Somehow it felt like the right ending. So it was months before I finished. But somehow it just felt like the right note to end the book. So I can't really quite think of an alternate ending.
That's fascinating. So you knew the whole time that this is how you wanted it to end, and part of the process of writing the book was figuring out how to make the logic of the book work so that the characters end up in that place?
It's more like the sentences, the last few sentences felt to me like the right ending. Of course, I had the synopsis after several months of writing, so I sort of know how it's going to end. Of course, I was not completely fixated on it. If things change, I was open to change that ending, but in the end, it still felt like the right ending. So I kept it. But those particular sentences just struck me as the right note to end the book.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked a little bit about doing research for this book, both in terms of reading other texts and doing field research. You talked about free writing. And you always had the sense of this particular note, emotional note on which the story is going to end. I'm curious about your process of bringing all of these elements together and then going forward into revision. Were there ever moments where you stepped back and changed big parts of the story? Were there ever moments where you thought, well, my research is bringing up a character that I feel I now must have? What was it like doing the editing, knowing the depth of material that you had for it?
With this book, I didn't do substantial editing like what you said. That's like changing the big things. It's more like I think more like trimming. I just put I wrote so many words. So I cut at least 1/3 of what I originally put down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just really try to make it concise enough. So yeah, a lot of editing process has to do with that, just concision, precision, try to make each moment feel truthful. Try to make every word exact. A lot of times was spent on that. I actually didn't have major I didn't really go through major revision with this book.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a
don't know it's good or bad thing, but
there's a question from Erina Horikawa, who says, I feel like you had strong female characters in the book. I would love to hear about your process of developing the personalities and characteristics of the two main female characters and maybe the white hotel boss.
Hotel boss. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, the Fei Yan character, I think it's the first time I'm writing a strong female character like the Fei Yan. She seems to be this quintessential survivor, explorer. She seems to embody this frontier spirit. It's fun to write about her. She's so assertive. So I didn't really plan it. I just somehow was able to hear her voice and just through free writing, and she becomes she sort of reveals herself to me. And with Sixiang character, it's sort of in her narrative is sort of the coming of age narrative. She grows up, she's 10 at the beginning of the story, then at the end she's 20, and she sort of learns about what hope is, what family is, all those things, and she sort of also has gained more self-knowledge. It's really hard to talk about process because I feel like I'm being repetitive here. A lot of it has to do with first, research, knowing, what life could be like, then just try to integrate all the information in my head into, believable, convincing characters. So that has so much to do with, again, free writing, just trying to just, I think just a lot. I was able to write every day. That semester I had a research leave, so I was able to write every day, and that was so essential in constructing these characters, learning about them, because every day you're you're approaching them in some way. You're writing closer to them and to hear their voice. And so, yeah, to have that time to work on novels, that's definitely a privilege. I wish I have the time now with my next book.
I love that. I think part of what you are maybe bringing up is how, we can talk about process all day, but there's also a place where the fiction comes from, which is completely opaque and mysterious. And yeah, it's difficult to try and get into the roots that take us through that place. There's a question, there are a couple questions. One from Corinna Cook, who says, can you talk a little bit about big structural choices in the novel? I'm interested to hear about chronology, for example, and movement back and forth in time.
Hi, Corinna. So nice to hear. I mean, not hearing your voice, but sort of hearing your voice. The big structure, yeah. I think knowing I was going to, use this alternate perspective really helpful. So suddenly I can see the larger things, right? Because the structure allows me to write about these four characters almost simultaneously and envision how their lives interconnect. So I really like that, and that's sort of a moment that feels like they click, especially when I was doing some free writing and suddenly realized I could, I realized Sixiang and Daoshi actually can meet each other in that particular way. Then suddenly, their lives are all interlocked. But I wouldn't say I had this outline before I did the writing. So this outline really emerged because of the free writing, because of learning about these characters, learning about letting them reveal themselves to me. So yeah, and then once I have that kind of once I understand how their lives interconnect, then there's again mapping. Yeah, it's a mysterious process, like you said. It's almost hard to remember what happened, right?
Right. Also because it's such a long process and you are
Yeah,
in the world for such a long time. Yeah, I completely hear you. There's a follow-up question from Cherry who says, did you foresee how Sixiang and Daoshi's relationship would develop? Was that part of your plan, or did it develop as you were fleshing out their characters? I found that relationship the most fascinating.
Yeah, me too. I really like their relationship, and I didn't plan it. So that when I suddenly somehow saw that they can meet the way they do, right? It's kind of illuminating moment for me as well. It's very joyous to have those moments during your writing. Suddenly you feel like, oh, you can actually see this characters meet in this very natural, organic way. Like you don't have to arrange them to meet. Somehow this just seemed to right for them to meet this way. Like almost you're discovering that, right, rather than imposing that plot onto them.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody has a last question, now's your chance to get it in. I can jump in. I am very curious to hear what you are working on now.
I
As
just
much as you are comfortable talking about it.
I'm actually really curious to what about you? Like what have you been working on? But I just started researching for this new thing. It's just too early to talk about it. What about you? Are you working on a novel?
Yes, just working on a novel.
Yeah.
Also teaching like you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I completely understand your feeling that something is too early to talk about, but I will be very excited to know more about it in proper time, and I will be so excited to read it. And maybe we can close with a very simple and really fun question, which is we're at the end of the year. Can you recommend a couple books that you've read this year that you've loved?
Yeah, I do like the Jhumpa Lahiri's Whereabouts. It's just it's very. Of course, I'm interested in her process. It's a self-translation. I'm curious what the Italian version is like. Um, I think the language is so distilled. I just love that kind of quiet observation. And I'm currently reading a nonfiction book by Annie Dillard called For the Time Being. That's I really admire the way she writes about details. She's just so skillful. She's like very subtly merging what's being seen with what's being felt. So I'm planning to read more of her nonfiction. What about you? Do you have any books to recommend?
Oh, so many. A novel that I read a few months ago that I really love is called Happy by Selena Basra.
Okay.
It's about this immigrant in Italy, actually, from
Mhm.
India, who is obsessed with film, and he has this very vivid inner life.
Mhm.
And it's really funny and it's really heartbreaking. And he's a radish farmer. It just felt very surprising, and really beautiful.
Mhm.
And yeah, I loved that book very, very much.
I'll check it out.
Well, on that joyful note of book recommendations, maybe we will wrap it up and say thank you, everybody, for coming. Please check out Chun's brilliant book. It sounds like several of you already have, which is marvelous. But if you
Thank you.
haven't, please check out Chun's brilliant book. And thank you so much, Chun.
Thank you so much, Megha. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for those questions.